Hi, I'm Chef Diane, and today I'm going to make a fig and gorgonzola tart. This is one of my favorite things to eat myself, and I've made it for events, and I've made it in cooking schools, and for clients of mine. It's a really easy recipe. The whole basic thing is to learn how to make this great fig compote. So the fig tart I'm going to be making today, I'm going to do two ways. One with a pre-made flatbread pizza, and also the other way with a frozen puff pastry. I have my ingredients all out, and I'm going to show you what we're going to be using. I'm going to be using some dry figs here, and the trouble with them is they're a little bit too hard, so we're going to plump them up in some hot water. We're going to saute a shallot. I have fig jam, and you can find this anywhere now. It's usually in the area of cheese and crackers now, but you can find it with your jams in your local store. We have extra virgin olive oil, some balsamic vinegar. We're going to have scallions on top. We're going to season with salt and pepper, and gorgonzola is also going to go on the top. In the fig compote too, we will have rosemary, and that's going to just make it taste fabulous. I never would have thought rosemary would go with something sweet, but it just is great. All right, so let's get these figs over to our stove, and I have a saucepan here with some boiling water. You can also soak these in really hot tap water, but it takes quite a while to get them softened, okay? So I have some dried figs, but they are not sun-dried. Sun-dried figs are pretty hard to revive and make soft. Okay, so here are my figs. I'm dumping them into some boiling water. I'm just going to, move them around a little bit. Some of them are stuck together. And as soon as these plump up, maybe in just a few more minutes, we're ready to go. We'll take them out of the hot water, cool them down a bit, and chop them up. Okay, so a lot of people don't know how to deal with a shallot, and they're almost like a baby onion. They're not like a garlic, so you're not going to smash them. So I treat them like the onion, and I cut off either end. And then I'm just going to take my little paring knife and cut through the skin. I like to score the skin of an onion or a shallot. It's just a really easy way to get this off. And shallots are really sweet. They're way sweeter than an onion, and they're used in more delicate dishes, in French dishes, and even in some Thai cooking. All right, so I have my beautiful shallot here, and I'm going to cut it in half the long way. And I'm going to let that sit on my board. I'm flattening it out so it doesn't roll around. And now I'm grasping the shallot, and I'm just going to cut some long cuts into it. Okay, and then after this, we'll just mince this up. So here's the chef knife. I like to go back and forth sometimes with two knives to do certain work in the kitchen, certain techniques. And we want to get this a little bit fine because we don't want big pieces of shallot in our compote. You'll see them, but you don't want them like floating around. So how I like to do this always is to push things to the center. You'll see that in some of my other videos. I just think it's a really neat technique. And I go back and forth like a little crossword puzzle and push it back in as it spreads out. And it doesn't take too long, and suddenly you have this chopped shallot. There, that's good enough. So I'm just taking my shallots and getting them ready for when I cook them. Pop them in a little bowl or whatever you've got. So I cooked my figs in this boiling water for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. You just want to sort of get them softened up enough. They're going to cook again in the fig jam, so they don't have to be perfect. And let's grab these and bring them over to the cutting board, and I'll show you what we're going to do with these. Okay, so my figs are really hot right now. I'm going to put them on my cutting board and spread them out. And you'll notice too with dried figs that the little stem is still there, and that is hard. It's really, you really have to get that off, okay? So I'm just gonna go along and get that off. That would really kind of like get chewy in your dish. So you'll be able to see it very easily. And we'll knock all of those off. Okay, so now I'm going to start taking my figs, and I think I'll just cut them all in half to start with, and then we'll mince these. You don't have to do really a small mince. This can be kind of a rustic one. We just want to get them down a bit. So I'm just going to sort of chop them randomly, and you don't have to get too fussy about this. I wouldn't put this in a food processor or it'll puree them, and you kind of want some kind of a texture in your compote and on your pizza that you make or whatever it is you're making with this dish. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to put this in my container to have everything ready. There. So I have some fresh rosemary, and if you don't, you can actually use dry rosemary. Rosemary is one of those herbs that really works well when it's dried and kind of, you know, resuscitates in whatever liquid you're using, water, whatever. But it's really easy to deal with rosemary. You can see I'm pulling the needles off and I'm going like backwards, except for the top, and that's the tricky part. But it's very powerful too, so you don't need a lot of it. And fresher is going to, you're going to use less with fresh rosemary than you would dry. Okay, so let me grab this. We're going to rough chop this because I don't want I don't want the rosemary needles to be too chewy in the compote. I want people to eat this and be really comfortable. So we're going to do a nice rough chop here. Okay. Rosemary is something you see a lot in northern Italy, and this particular this particular dish is something you might find there. Okay, so the last thing we have to prep will be our scallions. We're going to use scallions instead of an onion because they cook up really quick and they have just great flavor for this dish, okay? So let me get these. I'm going to show you how to chop a scallion. A lot of times in the food business, you learn a lot of techniques that help you move along faster because that's the nature of cooking professionally. So one thing that I learned about scallions and how to get them going even faster is to group them. Okay, we're going to use both the white and the green parts in some recipes, particularly Asian recipes. You use one or the other. But for this, this is going to be the top of our pizza, so it will certainly hold up. So I grab a few of them and I put them together, and I'm going to get the root off. Okay, and I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to trim off the green a little bit. Just trim off the ratty part of the green. Then this is the best part on how to chop this quickly. I'm cutting my scallions in half right in the center. And I'm going to bring this part up here and join it with this other half. I have this stack of scallions that I'm going to chop very quickly. Okay, you can also chop these at an angle if you want to make them prettier. Okay, and that makes them a little more attractive. It's all up to you. It's going to look a little bit nicer, but I just do whatever I'm in the mood to do at the moment. So we're finishing. Always keep your fingers in, of course, when you're chopping anything. Oop, that's hard right there. So we're just about ready with these, and I'm going to wait on the others and see how far we get with these. Okay, and if you find that your scallions didn't cut, this is very common, just go back and cut them. They do tend to stay together. So there you go, that was really quick, and now I have these ready for my pizza or my tart, whichever I want to make. So let's move this over here. We're going to go to the stove right now. We're going to make this beautiful compote. Okay, so I have a nice heavy-duty saucepan, and I'm going to turn my burner to about medium. And we're actually going to take olive oil and start it with olive oil. This is not meant to have a lot of oil in it. This is just a vehicle to saute our shallots. So you just don't want this compote to be oily. So I probably have a teaspoon in there, maybe a teaspoon and a half or so. I barely coat the bottom of this, okay, of this pan. So I'm going to wait until this heats up just a little bit, and then in goes my shallots, and we're just going to cook these till they're sort of soft and caramelized. So let me do that trick where we put something into the pan and see if it sizzles, and it's not quite yet. So I would say let's give that just a little bit more time. All right, so I'm seeing my shallots all sizzly and in that oil, so now I can add these, and I hear that great noise there, that sizzle that shows me we were really ready. I'm going to give this a tiny bit of the swirl in the oil, and I'm also going to add my little tiny bit of salt. That's always sort of what I do at the beginning, and it helps sweat onions or shallots, and it just stimulates the flavor. We're going to let these just cook for a few minutes before we stir them again. So I'm going to give these a little swirl again. And I can see them changing already. These do not take long, and it's very easy to burn shallots. So just be really gentle and careful, much like garlic. They will go up really fast. All right, so I'm seeing that my shallots they've gotten a little crispy, and they're a little bit brown here and there, and that's a great sign. This has sweetened them up. So now in goes my fig jam. Okay, I'm going to stir that around and mix it with the shallots. I'm going to turn my heat down just a little bit. It was still up there on a little bit like a medium high. And now in goes my softened figs. Let's get those in there too, so they start getting into that jam. You're going to love this. This is so unique. It's one of the best things, I think, if you're a fan of fig, that you'll ever have. All right, so now in goes some rosemary, that fresh rosemary. Okay. And now we're going to loosen this up and also add flavor by using that balsamic vinegar. Now don't add too much because it will water this down too much, but you do need it in there. Usually it's about a tablespoon or two, so there's about one-ish. About two, and you don't have to use expensive balsamic at all. And you can see how dark this has become, a beautiful dark color. Okay, so now I'm just shaking off my ingredients, and I'm just going to add a little tiny bit of salt and pepper. Cook this for just a few minutes, and it's done. There's your fig compote. You can double this recipe. Like I said, it lasts in the fridge for quite a while if you're having a party or you're making a lot of these pizzas or whatever you're making. You can also make this on a baguette. You can take the baguette and cut it like a crostini. I've done that many times, and do what we're going to do with our ingredients. You will see as we're making the pizza, and it's such a wonderful appetizer to have with drinks and, you know, any time of the year. So I'm going to let that cook just for a few more minutes, and then let's make our pizza. So I've cooked the compote for a few minutes, and it's gotten all bubbly, and just the smell is just incredible. And I'm going to put it into a bowl to cool a little bit. You can cool this totally and work with it cold to make your pizza or whatever you're making, or you can actually use it while it's warm. By the time we finish setting up our pizza and our puff pastry, this will be workable. There. So I'm making two versions of this, one with puff pastry, as I mentioned, and one with the flatbread. So when I make it with the puff pastry, I like to roll. I buy pre-rolled, pre-made puff pastry, and I like to roll it out just a little bit to get it a little bit thinner than what it's like when you first open the package. I take my puff pastry out a few hours before I want to use it for anything, and I let it sit in the refrigerator. You really want to work with this while it's cold. Once it softens and gets warm, it's really difficult to work with. So you can see I'm unrolling a piece. Okay, and it's very chilled. It isn't frozen at all, but it's very nice and cold, okay? And so I really want to get this a little bit thinner. So we're just gonna go over it a touch. You know, don't flatten it out too much because then you'll be in trouble. You'll have a piece that's, you know, too thin. So I would say just maybe 1 or 2 rolls over the whole thing. Okay, so now when you make this, you can make the whole fig tart right on here. But when I have company or I do this for catering or events, I like to cut this down so people can have an individual piece, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you can cut this into smaller pieces, but I'm going to serve 4 pieces with this. Okay, so if you buy puff pastry, you'll usually get 2 rolls in a box, so you will have 8 pieces. I'm just going to cut this in half the long way. And then I'm going to cut this in half, and this is a perfect size for someone to have lunch. If you're having a party, you could even cut this down smaller and have individual pieces. So that's up to you. Okay, so let me get this on a parchment paper lined cookie sheet right now before it softens anymore. So we're just going to space these apart. And make sure there's a little bit of distance between them because they do get a little bit puffy, of course. Okay. And you don't have to do this, but I like to do this. I prick this a little bit so that it just, you know, it keeps it down a bit. You know, it won't, you know, poof up too much. You are going to have these toppings on it, but this is a nice little technique that you probably want to do with most of your puff pastry baking if you're doing tarts, an asparagus tart or other vegetable tarts, okay? So just give it a real light little fork and, you know, just all over the place. So the other thing you could do is, if you really want to, is to, I don't do it, but you could fold this in just slightly to give it a little bit of a ridge. Why don't we do that, just to make it a little more attractive. All right. Now the thing about working with the puff pastry version of this is you can't put too much of your compote on it because it weighs it down, okay? And I actually have some chilled compote that I'm going to grab, and we're going to use that on the puff pastry because this is really hot and it will really like sink into this puff pastry. Okay, so I've gotten my chilled version of my compote that I made maybe a few weeks ago, and it's nice and icy cold. And see, this is how you can sort of prep things ahead of time to get your meal ready or your hors d'oeuvre ready, whichever way you're going to use this. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to grab little tiny dollops of our compote, and we're going to space them around. Like, I don't want to smear this whole thing with the compote because it's too wet and it won't work well with this version, with the puff pastry version. I can do it on my pizza if I want. So let's get these pieces here. You can see there's some fig. And we're going to break that apart a little bit. There we go. And that's perfect. Don't worry about how it looks because it's all going to taste great and look great. Okay, so I'm just dotting this about, leaving some space in between each little dollop here. I have my oven preheated too. Whenever you cook anything with puff pastry or you bake, you always have to preheat your oven. Never put anything you're going to bake into an oven that you've just turned on. It's just not going to work well. The oven really needs to be hot and ready for the baking. Okay, so that's good enough on that. And we're going to use Gorgonzola on this, and I have, people who tell me I don't like Gorgonzola, I've never liked it, but you would be amazed at how incredible it is on this pizza. If for any reason you absolutely can't tolerate it, you can use another cheese. You might want to put something that's substantial, like a sharp cheddar. I wouldn't put mozzarella. The mozzarella and the Fig Compote don't work well together. They clash, so don't do that. Now you can also put prosciutto on this, which is dynamite because you get the salty from the prosciutto and you get the sweet from the compote. I'm not doing that today, but if you did, chop up some prosciutto like, you've seen in other videos of mine, and just sprinkle it all about right now. You can sprinkle it all over your tart. But right now, here goes the Gorgonzola. And I like to buy it, already chopped and cubed and ready to go. It's up to you. And, this is enough. I mean, this has such great flavor. You don't need to, pack this on here. All right, so now comes your scallions. So just grab some of those great chopped scallions and pop them all over. And you don't want this to sit out long, get it right in the oven because the puff pastry will start getting really warm. And when that happens, it doesn't rise as well. It doesn't have yeast in it, but it's layers and layers of butter and, your dough. And so you really have to, watch it. So we're all set. And this is going to come out beautiful and caramelized. Okay, so in it goes. A 400-degree oven, about a medium shelf in here, and I'm going to time it for about 15. Okay, so now we're going to do the flatbread pizza version, which is almost exactly the same, except we can be a little bit more liberal because we're not dealing with puff pastry, which is delicate. So I buy these pre-cooked flatbreads. They're easy to find and they're really good actually. And we're going to use one of these. So now I'm going to just grab the Fig Compote that we just made, and I'm going to put little spoonfuls here and there. And don't worry, you can kind of lace it around if there's a little bit of extra fig jam. It'll be fine. This smells so good. Wish you were here. All right, and I want to pretty much coat it. One thing I do when I cook is to make sure that when I make a recipe, the person who's going to get maybe the last piece is going to definitely have the good flavor that all the rest of the recipe has. That's important. So if you're making lasagna, you want to make sure that the cheese is distributed properly. All right, so this is pretty good. I wouldn't say I'm gonna saturate it, it's gonna be too much if I do. And now I do the same thing and I sprinkle the Gorgonzola all over the top. And like I said, you could be a little bit more liberal with this because it's really going to hold up. All right, so now I'm going to take my scallions and get those all over the place. So we're going to put it in here with our puff pastry, Let that cook probably 15 minutes or so, or until we see it all bubbly and the gorgonzola starts melting. So here's our puff pastry version of our fig and gorgonzola tart. So right now I wouldn't want to do anything to it. I need to have it calm down and cool down. It's a little bit too wet and slippery and it might not cut well. These are really best served like at room temperature, or they can be slightly warm. So I'm going to let this sit here for maybe another 15 minutes before I take it off of the cookie sheet and cut it into smaller pieces, or just serve this for lunch. So here's our flatbread pizza version. And we're going to let that cool too. And that looks perfect. It's a little bit browned around the edges. And the gorgonzola has all melted. This you could slice into pieces at your party and serve it as an hors d'oeuvre or a little starter with some wine. And you can do the same as with this, with the puff pastry. You can actually, take this off of the parchment and cut this in quarters. And let's do that right now. So the bottom is browned. Okay, and now I can take this. This works really well as an hors d'oeuvre. And I'm going to cut this in quarters. And get myself a really pretty plate to serve this on. So grab yourself a nice plate and you can just space these apart. Keep them a little away from each other. They're a little bit sloppy right now because they're still warm. And I would space them apart just a little bit like I'm doing, so you have, room for your guests to grab a piece. Okay, and there you are with an hors d'oeuvre, a starter, a snack, anything that you want. So now here's the flatbread pizza version. And like I said, you could also cut this into squares. And I like to sometimes cut these into long slices. Okay, and serve them this way. That's a little more substantial. This is still pretty warm, so it's a little bit sloppy, but at home you can cool this down just a touch. Here we are, and I hear that crunch, which is nice because this shows that our crust on the bottom has been browned. Okay. Serve this with your favorite drinks and enjoy. Thank you for joining me today at my Italian kitchen, and I hope you get to make this recipe. It's out of this world. I think you'll enjoy it all year long, and I think your friends and your family will just think it's the best. Please enjoy. Ciao. Have a great day.